Good day, learners. Welcome to a discussion on social science history for grade 9. We want to go through a discussion of some simple questions as we prepare for June examinations. Right, we are going to look at structure of the paper, and also we're going to discuss key questions and also how we will be attempting to answer specific questions according to the guidelines of answering questions in history. So we are going to look at source-based questions, and also we're going to look at how we answer paragraph questions, and also how we attempt to answer essay questions. Right. So for the June examinations, we are going to focus on the specific topics from term 1 and also topics in term 2 history that will be part of the June examination. So we are going to analyze the given sources and also try to analyze the given questions and try to figure out how best we can attempt to answer a given set of questions. Right. We check, we have question number 1A. It's a source-based question. With source-based questions, you're supposed to extract some of the information from the given sources, and some of the questions, it's not like we get all the information that we need to answer the questions from the sources, but we contextualize according to our knowledge that we have because of the studies that we would have undertaken. So we are going to look at how best we can attempt to answer those questions, since we are saying some of the information is extracted from the sources, but it's not everything that is extracted from the sources. Right. Key question. The key question is saying, what happened to Germany after World War I? What happened to Germany after World War I? Right. So we're going to start source 1A, and we'll use source 1A to answer our questions. Right. The first question, part 8, says whose speech is given in source 1A. We're going to analyze the source and see whose speech is actually given in that source. And then also it says, what attitude does the author of the source 1B show towards Germany? And then we mention 2 terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Right. So we go to our source and try to figure out information from the source. That is source 1A. It says Germany is going to pay, and I personally have no doubt that we will get everything out of her that you can squeeze out of a lemon and a bit more. Not only all the gold Germany has got, but all her silver and jewels shall be handed over. Sir Eric Gates, British Member of Parliament, in a speech in 1918. Right, that is our source. Remember, we are looking at a situation where Germany was supposed to pay reparations for causing for the damages that were caused during the First World War. So that's the situation. We are having a speech by a British Member of Parliament who is actually claiming that Germany was supposed to pay for the damages that it caused in the First World War, which we call the reparations. So if we go to our questions based on our source here, the source information, we are going to look at the first question, which is question number A. Our response, I think we can figure it out here. Whose source? It's Eric Gates, who was the British Member of Parliament, is our response to the first question. We are told that that was a speech by a British Member of Parliament who is by the name Sir Eric Gates, and that is our response for the first question. Whose speech is given in source 1A? It's a speech by Sir Eric Gates, and who was also a British Member of Parliament. So that is an extraction question. We just extract the information from the given source. And then the next question is saying, What attitude does the author of source 1b show towards Germany? What is their feeling towards Germany according to the expression that is given in the source? If we check the attitude, you can find it by merely looking at the words which were used in the source. Germany is going to pay. And I personally have no doubt that we will get everything out of her that you can squeeze out of a lemon and a bit more. What kind of attitude from those words? How is the British Prime Minister perceiving Germany? What is his attitude towards Germany? So apparently we can say the minister, the member of parliament, he has a strong feeling. From the statement that he gave, it implies that the minister had strong feeling. For number B, he had a strong feeling about punishing Germany. From what he expressed in the source, we can actually figure out that the British Prime Minister had got very strong feelings about punishing Germany. He actually wanted Germany to be punished. From the way he expressed himself, he gave a strong feeling about his need for Germany to be punished over the causing of the First World War, or it has to pay for the reparations for the damages that were caused in the First World War. Right. Then we go to question number C. Question number C, it says, if you check on question number C, mention two terms of the Treaty of Versailles which were seen as punishment for Germany. Right. This one here, we are supposed to figure out from information from our studies. We want to identify the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. How was Germany supposed to be punished? What kind of punishment was going to befall on the Germans after the accusations of causing the First World War? Right. We know that Germany was supposed to pay reparations. Germany was supposed to pay reparations. Was supposed to pay for the damages that were caused during the First World War. And also, Germany was supposed to lose land. Germany also lost land as part of the punishment that it got, that she got. And also had to admit guilt of causing the war. Germany was also supposed to admit the guilt of causing the war. She was supposed to accept the fact that is the one who actually caused the war. So was supposed also to admit, and also was not supposed to build a strong force. Or what we can say, was not allowed to rearm. Because of the fears of another future war, they decided that Germany was not supposed to rearm, was not supposed to create a strong army so that it won't have potential of causing another world crisis. And also, that is around what was supposed to be the punishment for Germany for causing the First World War. It was given some of those punishments as part of the agreement of the Versailles Treaty. Right. So we move on to the next question. Our next question is question number 1B. Key question: how did Hitler persecute those that he hated in the 1930s and in the 1940s through the Holocaust? Right. I will briefly highlight on the Nazi German under Hitler. We understand that Hitler was using the ideas of race. He was ultimately believing in the superiority of particular races over others. We know of those scientific ideas of race. So apparently Hitler was believing that he wanted to create a pure iron race for Germany. He wanted to persecute other groups of people, other races, so that Germany becomes a pure iron society. That was his aspiration. So because of that, he developed negative feelings towards other races and got engaged in a mass killing of some other races which he deemed were inferior, and in the support of the creation of a pure iron race. That was Hitler's ideas of race that he was ultimately perpetrating and trying to create a society of the pure iron race. So, given that information, we want to try to attempt to answer the questions and also try to analyze the source information that we have. We are going to look at source 1B. Right. The source below seeks to explain the Holocaust as practiced by Nazi Germany. Right. It says the Holocaust was a state-sponsored persecution and mass murder of millions of European Jews, Romani people, the intellectually disabled, political dissidents, and homosexuals by the German Nazi regime between 1933 and 1945. The word Holocaust, from the Greek word holos, or wall, or kustos, or bend, was historically used to describe a sacrificial offering burned on an altar. After years of Nazi rule in Germany, dictator Adolf Hitler's final solution, now known as the Holocaust, came to fruition during World War II, with mass killing centers in concentration camps. About 6 million Jews and some 5 million others targeted for racial, political, ideological, and behavioral reasons died in the Holocaust. More than 1 million of those who perished were children. That is the source that we have on Nazi Germany. We want to try to extract information that is going to help us attempt to answer in those given a set of questions. Right. So if we go to our questions, right, our first question, number 1.11, it wants us to define the term Holocaust. The term Holocaust there is a clue of how you can define it according to the source, because it gives us a description of the meaning of the word and its origin, so that you can be able to figure out a proper definition from your understanding of the concept based on the description of the question of this term in the source. So the first one is saying this, the term Holocaust. How can we define the term Holocaust? Right, we can define it as here. Question number 1.1.1, right? You can say the Holocaust, it was mass killing. You can define it as mass killing of Jews by Hitler. Right. It's a simple definition that you can use to describe the Holocaust. Mainly, it was the Jews who were targeted, and we are talking of mass killings here. We are saying it was large scale. By mass, you are saying it was large scale, meaning to say there were quite large numbers of people who were targeted for persecution, who were killed in the Holocaust. So it was large scale killing of the Jewish people by Hitler or by the Nazi. That is basically describing the Holocaust. He was targeting those specific groups of people, mainly the Jews, for mass killings or for large scale murder. That was the Holocaust. Right, we move on to the next question. The next question is saying, who were murdered during the Holocaust? Identify two kinds of people. In the source, we are given quite a big number of groups of people who were targeted by Hitler during the Holocaust. We can check from here. We are told persecution and mass murder of European Jews is number one. the Romani people. Number 2, the intellectually disabled. Number 3, political dissidents. 4, and homosexuals. 5. So you can pick amongst those, you can pick any 2 from those given 5 groups of people as the targeted groups for mass murder or for mass killings. Those were some of them groups of people who were targeted for mass killings according to the source. You just extract 2 from those given 5 groups of targeted people. Right. Then we can move on to the next question. Why, according to the source, were people targeted? Quote 3 pieces of evidence. Why? Right. We want to identify reasons why those people were targeted. And we need to quote 3 pieces of evidence from the source. When you are quoting, it means we are directly extracting the information from the source. So we want to go to the source and try to analyze the reasons for the target of those people. Why were they targeted? What was the basis behind him targeting those specific groups of people for mass killings? All right, we go to our source and we try to analyze the source information. Right. It says, if we check here, about 6 million Jews and 5 million others targeted for, that is where we find our answer. They were targeted for racial, and also they were targeted for political and ideological and behavioral reasons. Those were the reasons for the targeting. Why was he targeting? They were targeted for racial reasons. Right, what we call racial reasons here, we are looking at the differences in races. Hitler believed that the Aryan race was a superior race which was supposed to dominate over other races, and other races were inferior according to the hierarchy of races, and therefore it was deemed fit enough to persecute other races for that reason of racial belief. And also for political reasons, we are looking at people who are regarded as political dissidents, those who were against the political ideologies of the Nazi. They were targeted for political reasons because they were not conforming to the ideas of the political perception of the Nazi German. And also for ideological reasons, their way of thinking, their ideas were different from the ideas of the Nazi German. So whoever had got a different idea, who had got a different ideological perspective, which was different from the ideological perspective of the Nazi, was targeted for persecution for that ideological reason. Then we also have behavioral reasons, the way people behave. Some people were behaving in some undesired ways according to the perception of the Nazi. They were deeming some behaviors unfit for the society and hence justifying that those people were supposed to be killed. Right, those are the reasons. So from the given set of the targeted, the reasons for targeting, you just pick any 2 from those ones, and that is the correct response for that question. Then we move on to the next question. Next question is the next question is talking about define why, according to the source, were people targeted. We quoted 3. Right. What is the other name for Holocaust given by Hitler? What is the other name? The other name, I think, is clearly given in the source, is the final solution. In the final solution, Hitler was targeting to wipe out all European Jews. He was targeting to exterminate all the European Jews through the final solution, where he was using now the extermination camps, where the Jews were put into gas chambers and apparently made to die of poisonous gas, and later on they were burnt. Their bodies, their dead bodies were also burnt after them inhaling the poisonous gases. That was the final solution, right? How, according to the source, did World War II start? According to the source, how did World War II start? Right, even before we look at the source, we need to have information about the causes of the Second World War, and we also need to analyze and look at what apparently led to the Second World War. We are looking at Germany's policy of as aggressive policy, whereby Germany was invading. Germany adopted an aggressive policy. Where it was expanding its territory. I think you understand the policy, the Labranzram policy, whereby Germany was adopting its policy of aggressive invasion of other territories to expand its living space. They declared that the Germans needed more living space, and hence they were aggressive invading other territories. And by doing so, that sparked the Second World War, because we understand that Poland was giving the backing of the USA, so that in any case, if Germany was targeting to invade expand its territory into Poland, USA was going to offer support to Poland so that it won't be invaded. That is apparently what led to the Second World War. So if we go to our source, we can try to figure out the information from the source, how the Second World War came to existence. Right. That is basically how the Second World War came to exist, because of Germany's policy of aggressive policy of invading other territories. So we can highlight it by saying that Germany invaded Poland. Actually, to invade the western half of Poland. That was in 1939. Because of its policy of aggressive invasion, Germany later on invaded part of western Poland, and that led to the Second World War. So if we check there, we have analyzed the information, and also we can check from the source how the Second World War came to exist. In September 1939, Germany invaded the western half of Poland, starting World War II. That is where we find our information. Germany invaded the western half of Poland, starting World War II. Right, we move on to the next question. The next question is question number define question number 1.2.2. Right, the question is saying, using the source and your own knowledge, explain how the Polish Jews became poor. The Polish Jews, we are saying, the Jews who were residents of Poland, those are the Polish Jews. So how did they become poor according to the source? Right, we have to check the source information and be able to interpret and find out the reason, so that we can explain how the Polish Jews became poor. How did they become poor? The Polish Jews. Right. Our information is saying German police soon forced tens of thousands of Polish Jews from their homes into ghettos, giving their confiscated properties to ethnic German, non-Jews outside German who identified as German. Germans from the Reich, or Polish generals, surrounded by the high walls. That one is the information that we want. We have actually come to find it out here. What happened? Tens of thousands of Polish Jews were forced from their homes into the ghettos. leaving their confiscated properties to ethnic Germans. So we are seeing the situation there that their properties were being confiscated, they were being taken away from them. And also they were being forced to stay in the ghettos. What we call the ghettos, those were places that were designed to accommodate the unwanted people. They were highly congested, and they were poor living conditions in those townships, what we termed as the ghettos. And also they were fenced. Movement was restricted in those places. People would not move freely in and out of those places. They were designated and they were guarded. Those were the ghettos, and they had extreme poor living conditions. So analyzing the situation from the source, we can summarize the reason as to why the Polish Jews became very poor. We can explain that number 122. We can explain that their properties were forcibly taken away. And they remained with nothing. That is how we can explain. Because of the situation of confiscation of their properties, it meant that their way of life was disrupted. Their properties were taken away forcibly and they remained with nothing. That is how they became poor. Apparently, they got to become poor because of the situation that befell them of having their property taken away and also them remaining with barely nothing after the process of the taking away of their properties by um, the authorities. Right. So we look at the next question. The next question is question number 1.2.3. Why, according to the source, were the ghettos a breeding ground for diseases? Quote two pieces of evidence. We are saying the ghettos were a breeding ground for diseases, meaning to say diseases will spread fast, were spreading fast in the ghettos. What facilitated the development and the spreading of diseases in the ghettos? Right, we want to go to our source and try to figure out source information that is going to assist us in finding. Right, it says in paragraph number 2, surrounded by high walls and barbed wire, the Jewish ghettos in Poland functioned like captive states governed by Jewish councils. In addition to widespread unemployment, poverty, and hunger, overpopulation and poor sanitation made the ghettos breeding grounds for diseases such as typhus. Right, so we can figure out our reasons here. There was widespread unemployment, is one reason. There was poverty and hunger. There was overpopulation, and there was poor sanitation. Those are the reasons why they became breeding grounds for diseases. People were highly unemployed. It meant that they did not have a source of income. In the event they fall sick, they could not find medication for themselves. They could not afford to get proper health attention, and hence they later on facilitated the spread of the diseases. And also poverty and hunger. And also, we talk of overpopulation. It's easy for the spread of diseases in a given overpopulated situation. Then also poor sanitation. It was also another contributing factor for spread and development of diseases in the ghettos. Right. So our responses are there in the source. We move on to the next question. We're analyzing question 1.2.3. Right. Need to move on to the next question. We are going to source 1C. Right, our source 1C. The first question is saying, what do you think sparked the Warsaw ghetto revolts? We need to go to the source and analyze the source and try to figure out what sparked the revolts in the Warsaw. Right, we are using a source 1D. The source below explains an element of resistance against the Holocaust in what became known as the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943. Right, our question, you want to look at the causes of the revolts. Amid the deportations, diseases, and constant hunger, incarcerated people in the Warsaw Ghetto rose up in armed revolt. So we are figuring out the situation there in the Warsaw Ghetto, how people were living, how life was, how bad life was, and how hard life was for the people in the ghetto, in the Warsaw Ghetto, leading to them revolting against the authorities. So we can summarize that by saying that is that is source 1D. We can summarize that by saying the conditions there in the ghettos were not conducive for human survival. So we can say they were unbearable conditions. We are seeing the situation there. People revolted because life was not easy for them in the ghetto. Life was hard. Or we can talk of inhuman conditions. Inhuman conditions in the camps. Hopelessness, hunger, and probably death. Those were triggering factors to the revolt. People were exposed to so much inhuman conditions. They were exposed to extreme worst conditions of life, and hence they needed to revolt against the authorities. They needed to fight back for their rights, and that led to the Warsaw Uprising. Right, I'll move on to the next question. We're looking at question number 1.3.1. Right, we need to look at 1.3.2. Why did the Nazi fail to keep operations of camps secret? Why did they fail to keep it a secret that they are putting people in the camps? Right, we try to analyze the information from the source and try to figure out why the Nazi German failed to keep it a secret that they were using the camps. Right. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising from April 19 to May 16 of 1943 ended in the death of 7,000 Jews and 50,000 survivors sent to extermination camps. But the resistance fighters had held off the Nazi for almost a month, and their revolt inspired the revolts at camps and ghettos across Germany preoccupied. Though the Nazis tried to keep operation of the camps secret, the scale of the killings made this virtually impossible. Our answer is here. The scale of the killings made this virtually impossible. What are we saying here? We are looking at the scale of the killings. The scale of the killings, we are saying the number of people who were killed in those camps was too big to be concealed, to be hidden. So, in summary, we can say for 132, this was 131. We can say the killings were so huge. It was impossible for people not to know. Because of the numbers of people who were killed, the numbers were very big. it was impossible for them to hide such information. The huge numbers made people aware of what was happening, and hence they could not succeed in hiding the operations of the camps. Right. I'll move on to the next question. That was question number 1.3.2. Want to look at 1.3.3. Right. Using the source and your own knowledge, explain why the Allied forces failed to respond to Nazi killings. Why did they fail to respond to the Nazi killings? Right. Why the Allied forces failed is because they were preoccupied with winning the war first. Remember, this was happening during the war. So their main purpose was to win the war. So you can say they were preoccupied with winning the war first. That was their target. They were targeting to achieve a positive result in the war. That was their main focus, and could not focus on the issue of camps in Nazi Germany, but rather they were concentrating on winning the war, which was ongoing during the same time of the camps. That is why they could not divert their attention to look at what was happening in the Nazi, the mass killings that were happening in Nazi. Right. We go to source 1D. What is the message being displayed by this image? Right. When you are interpreting visual sources and the question is saying the message depicted by a given source, we are seeing here, the picture below shows German Jews from Warsaw to Kisken in Bavaria being deported to ghettos and concentration camps where most met their death fate. So we are seeing those Jews, they are being deported into the ghettos, and some of them, unfortunately, they are going to concentration camps for extermination. So if the question is saying, what message? We want the deeper understanding of what you are seeing there. So from what we can see there, we can say that is 141. That is number 1.4.1. We can say the Jews were lined to concentration camps. Like animals. There's an element of lack of humanity as portrayed in the image, lining up people for killing. It's like you're taking animals to the slaughterhouse. That is the message that we can derive from what we are seeing from the visual source. Or we can also say the Nazis are taking Jews to death camps. The Nazis taking the Jews to death camps. They are unfortunately being taken to either the ghettos, or some of them are meeting their death fate. They are going to the concentration camps where they are going to be exterminated. Right, to move on to the next question. The next question is question number 1.4.2. Right, 1.5 is the paragraph question. Using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of about 8 lines, which is 80 words, explaining how Hitler persecuted those that he hated in the 1930s to 1940s through Holocaust. Right, so what you need to do here is you need to use information in the relevant sources And also you need to use your own knowledge. Right. What you do when you're answering a paragraph question, I will highlight on the skills that you need when you're answering a paragraph question, right? Number 1.5. I'll highlight on the skills of answering a paragraph question. Right, when you're answering a paragraph question, you must answer your paragraph question in what you call the PEEL format. P-E-E-L, P for a point, and E for explanation, E for evidence or examples, then L for a link. So when you're answering the first paragraph question, you must always start with a point. You must always start your paragraph with an answer to the question. You must answer the question. That is the first thing. Respond directly to the question. Give a direct response to what the question demands. In your opening statement of the paragraph, then you explain. You give more details to your answer. And then, on top of that, you also give examples. That is where now you use relevant sources. You find examples from the relevant sources as evidence. And then at the end, you provide a linking statement. A linking statement, you are saying, you provide a statement which shows or which proves how what you were explaining in the paragraph is answering the question. How is your information answering the question at the end of your paragraph? So what we're going to do here, we're just going to look at some of the examples or the evidence that we have. And also remember, if you are writing your paragraph and you are giving evidence from the given sources, you are supposed to provide or to give credit to the source. You're supposed to highlight where you found the evidence from by giving the sources that you consulted in bracket. I paraphrase the statement that you got or paraphrase the idea that you got from the source, and you put the source in brackets at the end of the idea to show that it's not your own knowledge, but you are giving credit to the source where you got the information from. Right, so I'll just highlight some of the evidences that you can use when you're answering this question. Right, like for example, Hitler identified. Hitler identified groups to be massacred. And those groups, remember, we looked at them in source 1A, where we said you were targeting the European Jews, you were targeting the political dissidents. It's from source 1A. By identifying, we are saying that he was perpetrating mass murder because he was able to identify the targeted groups. And also, we can also add information on people were killed because of race. We highlighted the reasons from source 1A, because of race, because of political reasons, and also some people were targeted because of ideologies and behavioral reasons or ideas, ideological. Those were some of the reasons why Hitler was targeting specific groups of people. For those reasons, he was targeting those groups for extermination. And then we also check, if we look at source 1C, it talks about, source 1B talks about the euthanasia. It talks about the euthanasia program. That is source 1B. It gives us information on euthanasia. And also, if you check, there's evidence of 7,000 Jews who were killed and sent to extermination camps. To extermination camps. sent to extermination camps. That one is source 1C. And also if you check in source 1C again, it talks about Jews were shot and killed and their bodies piled together. Before the public. That is another evidence that you can use. Then you provide a linking statement which shows that whatever you were saying in that paragraph is answering the question in the given direction of the question to show that your paragraph is contextualized, is responding to the question. You provide a linking statement at the end of your paragraph, right? That is how we attempt to answer paragraph questions, right? That was a paragraph question. We move on to question 2. How did the nuclear bomb change the world balance of power? That is our focus of question 2. We are looking at the nuclear age. Right. Give a definition for the word tension. When you're talking of tension, what kind of situation is that when you're having a tensional situation? When we are at tension, we are at conflict or we are disagreeing with one another. That is basically the idea of tension. So we are saying we can summarize it as conflict between countries. If you're having tension, it means you're not moving in the same direction. We're having conflict, we're having disagreements. So tension, we are saying it's conflict between countries. Give the names of the leaders and the countries they came from, according to source 2A. Right, we have to identify the leaders and their countries of origin, according to source 2A. Right. Leaders of the Allies at Yalta Conference. We are told that there was Winston Churchill. And where did he come from? Britain. So Winston Churchill of Britain. Then we have Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the USA. Then Joseph Stalin of Russia. Those are the responses. You give the leader and the country that they represent. Winston Churchill from the British, Franklin Delano Roosevelt from the USA, and Joseph Stalin of the USSR or Russia. Right. Number 2.1.3. Right, 2.1.3. According to your own knowledge, what is it that was discussed at the conference? At the Yalta conference, what was the discussion? The discussion there was to divide Germany into 4 zones. Germany was supposed to be divided according to the Yalta conference. They held a conference at Yalta to discuss about the future of Germany. And as a way of weakening Germany, it was supposed to be divided into what we call zones of occupation. And those zones of occupation were supposed to be occupied by the 4 major powers, which were France, the USA, Britain, and Russia. So that was the agreement that Germany was supposed to be divided into zones of occupation, and those zones were supposed to be occupied by the powers winning the Second World War. And in which year did the conference take place? I think if we check from the source, we'll find relevant information about the year when the conference was held. Right. Yalta Conference, when was it? February 1945. our information is there as the heading of the source. So directly, we are told that it was in the year 1945. And to be specific, it was in the month of February. But our question here is in need of the year in which the Yalta Conference took place. That was in 1945. Right. Why did the friendliness between them disappear after World War II? Why did the friendliness of those countries, we're talking of the UK, the USA, we're talking of Britain, we're talking of Russia. But later on, we are finding that Russia became an enemy of the two powers, USA and Britain. They were no longer working together. They were no longer agreeing with one another. What made them lose the friendliness after the Second World War? One is because they had different ideologies. By ideologies, we are looking at economic or political systems. We are looking at Russia. It was a communist, whilst USA and Britain, they were capitalists. So because of the differences in ideologies, they could no longer relate well to each other. After the Second World War, they were now following or adopting different political ideologies or economic ideologies. And also, we can argue that they no longer had Germany as a common enemy. They were united because of Germany. They were fighting against Germany, and that is what brought them together. They were working together in an effort to defeat Germany. But as soon as Germany was defeated, it was no longer their common enemy. So there was no more reason for them to keep befriending each other. Right, we'll move on to the next question. We are looking at source 2B, on which Japanese city was the first atomic bomb dropped. Which Japanese city was unfortunate to be targeted for the first bomb? Our response is here. Hiroshima was the target. Hiroshima is our response for the first question. Right. Move on to the next question. Number 1.2.3. Number 2.2.2. Explain why the United States of America chose to drop an atomic bomb instead of using conventional weapons. Why did they decide to drop an atomic bomb instead of using the well-known methods of fighting? Right. We try to check in the responses from our source and see if we can find relevant information. Right. Little boy exploded, instantly killing 80,240 people and seriously injuring 100,000 more. A T-shaped bridge at the junction of Onkawa and Moyotao rivers near downtown Hiroshima was the target. At 8:15 a.m., little boy exploded, instantly killing those numbers. The bomb exploded 1,900 feet above the center of the city over Shima Surgical Hospital. Right, we cannot find sufficient information or convincing information. We have to use our own knowledge to answer that particular question. Why did the USA not use conventional methods of fighting but decided to drop the bomb? Definitely, we can argue that the reason for USA dropping the bomb and not using the conventional methods or the non-methods of fighting was that she wanted to show a military power, to prove to the world that it had power in excess of what ordinary countries could do. So it wanted to show a military power. That is why they dropped the bomb. Or we can also say they wanted to stop the war. They knew well that if they used the atomic bomb, it was so destructive, and hence Japan would withdraw from the war. So for those reasons, we can justify why the USA chose to drop the bomb. Right, then number 2.2.3, our question for question 2.2.3 is saying, explain the effects of the first atomic bomb on the people of Hiroshima. We are told that 80,000 to almost 140,000 people were killed. And we also had about 100,000 who were injured. That was the effects. We had 80 to 140,000 people who were killed in the explosion, and also about 100,000 more who got injured. Right, then we'll move on to the next question. Refer to source 2C, the written source, and source 2D, the visual. How does the visual support the written source about the destructive effects of the first atomic bomb? We are relating two sources. Right, when you're answering this question, you are supposed to answer it in this particular way. We are looking at the support of sources. So we are looking at source 2C and source 2D. You say source 2C, actually it says written source, says whatever information you're going to portray there. And this is supported by source 2D, which is a visual, what is shown there. This is the format that you use when you're comparing information from different sources. Source 2C says this, it's a written source. You explain what is said in that source. And this is supported by source 2D, which shows what is shown there. So we want to go to the two sources and try to figure out information which is similar. When you're looking at the support of sources, we are saying what is in the first source, which is also in the second source, or which is similar to what is portrayed in the second source. So we are comparing the two sources. We are looking at the two sources to try to identify information which we can link or which is related. Right. Our question is saying compare the visual source, this one, to the written source. Right. So if we find here, we can say source 2B, we are comparing source 2B to source, let me check the sources. Which two sources are we comparing? We are comparing source 2C to source 2D. Source 2C and source 2D. Source 2C is this one, and source 2D is this one. Right. So we are looking at here, this is a visual source, and this is a written source. Right, if we go through the information in the written source, it says in less than 1 second, the fireball exploded to 900 feet. The blast wave shattered windows for a distance of 10 miles and was felt as far away as 37 miles. Over 2/3 of Hiroshima's buildings were demolished. The hundreds of fires ignited by the thermal pulse combined to produce a firestorm that had incarcerated within about 4 miles of ground zero. To the crew of Enola Gray, Hiroshima had disappeared under a thick churning flame of flames and smoke. The co-pilot, Captain Robert Lewis, commented, "My God, what have we done?" So we are saying, what information do we find here which is similar? From the written source, it says The blast wave shattered windows for a distance of 10 miles far away. Over 30 buildings were demolished. This source is saying buildings were demolished. And also, if we check here, we are seeing the destruction on buildings, which is evident here. So it supports. This source is showing buildings collapsing, which is supported by this source, which says buildings were demolished. It talks about fire here, hundreds of fires. And it's also evident if you check there, there are fumes of fire, and you can also see there is evidence that there's fire. So it supports. And also if you check, it talks about a thick churning form of flame and smoke, which is also evident. We have smoke all over the place. So basically, that is how you check and compare the sources. We are looking at similarities between the two sources. What is common between the two sources? What does the first source portray, which is also portrayed equally the same as the second source? That is how you compare sources. Right, then we move on to the next question. We're looking at the comparison of sources. Then we move on to the next question. Refer to how does the visual source support the written source? We've learned about that. Refer to source 2E. Identify one of the characters in the cartoon. We want to identify a character in the cartoon. Then what does the statement in source 2E? I can build anything. You can build bigger. Tell you about the attitude of the USA towards the USSR. Right, we are going to the question, to the source, the cartoon, and try to figure out. Right, here we can see there's this figure. I can build anything. You can build bigger. Yes, I can. No, you can't. They will build more of them. So the two leaders there, we are looking at these two countries which were in a Cold War situation, and we want to identify the two leaders. We know that on one side, we have the USSR, and on the other side of the conflict, we had the USA. So the leaders that we can talk about there during the time of the heat of the Cold War, for the side of the USA, we had JF Kennedy. And on the side of USSR or the Russians, we had Nikita Khrushchev. Those were the leaders during the height of the Cold War tensions. USA, John Franklin and Nikita Khrushchev on the side of Russia. That is question number 2.4.1. Then 2.4.2. What is the meaning of that statement? It shows that the two extreme sides were competing with one another. It means that they were in competition. Of building up on weapons. It meant that whatever was done by the other side would try to develop better than what the other extreme had done. That was the Cold War tensions that existed between the two extreme sides of capitalism and the side of communism. They were competing in developing weapons. They were competing in building up weapons, and they were not in physical confrontation. It was just a competition between the two extremes in trying to show their power against each other without physically fighting or physically engaging in a hot war. It was a Cold War situation, right? That is how we can attempt to answer that question, right? That takes us to the end of our source-based questions. The next question is the essay question. Question number 3, the end of Cold War in 1989. Right. What you need to do then, the division of Germany in 1946 and the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961 harmed the East-West relations. Do you agree? Use relevant evidence to support your argument in an essay of about 3 to 4 paragraphs. Right, I'll teach you the basic skills of answering an essay question so that you are able to structure your essay correctly. Right, when you're answering your essay question, remember we need an introduction. The introduction, it must be contextualized. Meaning to say, your introduction must directly respond to the question, must be answering the question, that is the contextualization. You are providing an introduction which is relating to the question directly and which is giving direction of your writing. What you are going to present must be clearly stated in the introduction and it must be answering the question. Right, there are 3 things that I want you to note when you're writing your introduction. The first thing, there are 3 steps that you must follow. Right? The first step is to take a line of argument or give an answer to the question. That is the first thing. Then the next thing that you are supposed to do is to give reasons why you are answering that question in that direction. Then number 3, you are supposed to give an elaboration or orientation. Your introduction must have these 3 steps for it to be contextualized. And it must have those ideas presented clearly. That is a complete introduction. So our question is saying, do you agree? Answer this question here. That is your first part of the introduction. Do you agree that the division of Germany and the building of the wall harmed the East-West relations? So if you are writing your introduction, also avoid using the first person, like I agree. You can use statements like in agreement, the German division, the 1946 German division and the construction of the wall damaged the East-West relations. You can use this as your opening statement. There is an answer. You have shown that you are agreeing that the building of the wall and also the division of Germany into zones of occupation brought harm to the relations of the East and West. And why are you saying so? Why are you saying so? You are giving general reasons to the situation. Why are you saying that the relations were harmed of the East and the West? The East, you are referring to Russia, and the West, you are referring to the USA, France, and Britain. Why did they ended up having bad relations? Because of the building of the wall and construction of the building of the wall and also the division of Germany. You are giving general reasons to why it harmed the relation. We can, this is so because it increased tension and suspicion between the two sides. You are giving general reasons. You can give other reasons. Then you elaborate. Elaboration, you are giving an orientation to the reader. What is the essay about? Then you can say, in this essay, further information on the harm between the relations is going to be elaborated. You are giving an orientation. What is the essay going to prove? What historical evidence are you going to use in the essay? That is what you're supposed to highlight in the introduction. Then you write your paragraphs. As you write your paragraphs, remember you're supposed to write them in peel format. You are presenting your paragraphs in the format of peel. Every paragraph must have a clear point. You must make a clear statement answering the question. And then you must explain that clear point. And then you can also give evidence or examples. Then you link back to show that you are answering the question. You provide a closing statement for every paragraph, which shows that whatever you were saying is relating to the question and is answering the question. That is how you link back your statements to the line of argument or to the question. You refer back to the question to show that whatever you have said in that paragraph is contextualized, is in the context of the question for every paragraph. Then conclusively, you come to your end of your writing, of your presentation, you give a conclusion. You tie up your argument, you sum up the main points of your discussion to end your discussion. So some of the points that you can use, I will just highlight some of the ideas that you can use to elaborate on this essay. You can talk of tension and mistrust between the two sides. They were no longer trusting each other because of the division of Yemen. And also, it developed into a Cold War. There was more tension without physical fighting. There was suspicion between the two sides. And also, you can say the West combined their economies. By combining their economies, they were ultimately outshining the Russian economy, which was struggling. People migrated from east to west. It was also increased tension because of the failure of the economy of the east. People were migrating. And then the USSR, because of that, was humiliated. It was losing its population because it was now migrating to the west, where the economy was doing well. And how did they respond? After that, Berlin was also divided. They also divided Berlin into zones of occupation, the 4 zones, but though it was falling under the main territory of USSR. And also, you can talk of the blockade. USSR introduced the blockade to the Berlin zones of occupation owned by the Western powers. Then also a fence wall, then replaced by a concrete wall. Crossing was no longer allowed. That is how you can argue around when you're writing your paragraphs of the body of the essay. You can use some of those ideas as supporting ideas to your presentation. Right. Basically, that was our paper. That was our last question, which is question number 3, which was an essay question in section B, giving us a total of 75 marks. So basically, that brings us to the end of our discussion on social science grade 9 history. I hope you will find this discussion useful and it will assist you in your studies. Till we meet in other discussions.